you didn't know, your speaker was going to be Eeyore. But it's actually quite fitting because today we're going to talk about some of the dark night of the soul. And, you know, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Laura and thank you to the board for the opportunity to come up and share. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm really just nobody. I've been around Unity. I've been around Unity for about 10 years, and I've kind of grown in this congregation. And I was invited to participate on the board within the first year of showing up, and you guys are crazy. I don't know what to say. You guys just let somebody walk in and show up and shine. And so I'm really grateful for that. Through participating on the board, it was an amazing process of kind of just shedding some layers and shedding some shame and shedding some fear. And not to say that I'm not still a work in progress, right? I decided to go back to some of my roots in A Course in Miracles. So I spent some time studying A Course in Miracles. I got ordained as a minister through 2 different organizations and really looked at how I practice a spiritual regiment, how I become vigilant for God. And the funny thing is that I stand here before you not as a Catholic, but as a man who is about to give some confession. And so over the last year, I've really struggled. It's been no joke. Some of you have seen some of the process, some of the effects of my struggle through my weight gain. In 2017, I got married. I had lost 120 pounds. I had co-founded a new ministry here in town that focuses on healing the mind and healing the body through working with the mind and our thought systems and our BS, red belief systems, and how we look at that stuff to really heal. And so I had some great success in 2017. I really went deeper and deeper into how I show up and shine. 2018, I learned that I was going to lose my full-time job, and in that process, I became very fearful. Finances have a way of triggering some fear in a guy. And I became fearful as I started to think about the prospect of not knowing where I was going to work. You know, the funny thing about that whole experience is that in hindsight, I was only out of a job for 7 days. Someone that I didn't even think about contacted me because they heard that the organization was relocating and headhunted me and got me hired on. But beyond that space of fear, I went out to pour my mother's ashes in Estes Park in June, and on the day that we were meant to go pour her ashes, we decided to go for a hike in the mountains and go for a horseback ride. And little did I know that I would mount this horse named Superman, and within 5 or 10 minutes of going on this horseback ride, as we're getting ready to line up for photos, there's a spook that takes place, and the second to last horse in the line of horses gets spooked. My stepdaughter's on this horse, and this horse comes running up in between the horses that my wife and I are on, and my horse gets spooked, and that's all I know. What I also have heard is that 4 other horses got spooked. The guide fell off their horse. My wife jumped off her horse on purpose. My stepdaughter fell off of her horse. My niece rode the horse running all the way back to the stable that she was on and had blisters and bruises on her thighs and on her hands. What happened to me is that I got about a half a block away. I made 2 real good bounces off of the seat, and I flew back, and I landed on a rock. I hit the rock in such a way that I broke the scapula of my shoulder as well as 3 ribs, and one of the ribs punctured my lung. And the only thing that I really remember from that incident is waking up for a brief moment, and my wife was cradling my head. My wife was cradling my head, and she said, "It's going to be okay." All right. And so after that, the funny story is that I asked what happened no less than 14 times. When we got to the hospital, my doctor's name was Dr. Goodlivin. So there's just some things that happen, right? Like there's things that we can't make up. I rode Superman. I didn't have the experience of Christopher Reeves, and then I show up and I have an encounter with Dr. Goodlivin. And in this encounter, I asked my wife, like, they even wrote down what had happened. They started making up stories about what had happened. Like I was on safari and I was riding a rhinoceros, because my mind, I had hit the side of my head. I still have a red mark because not only did I hit my back, but I hit the side of my head on this rock and got concussion. And so in this experience, I was debilitated. I was able to move around, but there was a lot of pain. I was on a lot of medication, and I wasn't making a whole lot of sense, wasn't remembering a whole lot of stuff, and it was challenging. I didn't know what to think about myself. Today, when are we going to get to the point, Josh? Today, we're talking about trust and moving from trust to try, right? And so this idea of trust doesn't just kind of flow from me. I'm kind of a stubborn guy. Like, there's two ways that I experience trust generally. One is from the gift of desperation, right? Like, I was taken out of my abilities. I was no longer able to take care of myself, and I had to trust that my wife was able to help me with that stuff, that there was no way for me to figure it out. Also, the gift of desperation, you know, I joke with my wife. I tell her, with my cell phone, I am the smartest man alive. I use it to keep my notes, so forgive me. The gift of desperation for me doesn't really come unless it's like a physical piece where I have to depend on somebody else for food, for activities, for movement, for that kind of stuff. But it also comes from consequences. There was a time in my life where I spent a few years, about 11 years, exploring my selfishness, exploring what I wanted to do, exploring how I could change the way I thought, felt, and experienced my life through partying, through going to concerts all the time, and through basically disregarding a lot of my responsibilities. I spent some time really exploring who and what Josh wasn't. You know, those experiences showed me a lot about what I thought I was, but they paved a way for me to really explore what I really am. The other way that I experience trust, or trust comes alive in me, is through inspiration, all right? And so when I'm open to a new way of living, when I have an example, for me, when I was before the accident, when I was losing weight and I was exercising regularly, I had this picture of a guy named Jason Whitrock. And Jason Whitrock is a bodybuilder. He's like super cut. He's like maybe 170 pounds, and he's if you do ketogenic nutrition, he's a well-known bodybuilder that uses ketogenic nutrition for his way to build mass. And I followed him, and I aspired to look like him. I aspired to lift like him. I used his workouts, and I didn't know how to do this stuff in myself, so I trusted his example, all right? There's a point in time for me that trust doesn't necessarily work. When it's trust in people around me, when it's trust in circumstances, when it's trust in a physical expectation or a circumstance, it doesn't really work for me. I've found that I can trust this idea that ice cream is really good, except when it falls on my shirt, right? I can trust this idea that people show me, but after a certain time, maybe that idea doesn't work for me anymore. There was a Harvard professor that did a study on why we do the things that we do. And what he found, what he decided to research, was he actually came across this recipe, and he noticed that this roast was prepared with one of the sides cut off of the roast, and he didn't understand why one side of the roast would be cut off one side of the roast would be cut off. He just didn't understand that. So he went to the person who prepared it. It was a fantastic roast. It was tasty. It was good. And he was like, well, who told you how to make this roast? And the person said, well, my mother taught me how to make this roast. And so he went to the mother and asked the mother to prepare the roast. And the mother pulled out the dish, and she got everything prepared, and she cut off the side of that roast, and they cooked it up, and they tasted the roast, and it was just as good, if not a little bit better than the first roast that he had tasted. And He's like, well, who taught you how to make this roast? And she responded, well, my mother did. And so he goes to the grandmother of the initial person, and he asks her kindly to prepare this roast for him. And as she's getting things ready, she gets out the pan and she takes out the roast, and she cuts off the side of it, and she cooks it all up in the pan, and sure enough, it's a fantastic roast. And he asks her point blank, why do you cut off the end of the roast? And the grandmother looks him square in the eye like he's the silliest person and says, well, of course I cut off the edge of the roast because it wouldn't fit in the pan. And so the point of the story is that we hear ideas that we see work for other people, and we just take them on without necessarily questioning these ideas. I went through this experience of not necessarily knowing what was going to happen to me, and I went back to my own old ideas. I went back to eating, and I went back to eating secretly. I went back to hiding the way that I was eating. I went back to using food to feel a temporary relief from the desire to feel at peace, to feel satisfaction. And I know that we all have a potential way that we try and stay small. And it's just kind of funny because the way that I try and stay small is the way that I actually physically get bigger. and so like you guys get to see some of that result, but the facts are for me is that the more that I tried to build a trust with myself and my own understandings, the more locked into smallness I stayed. That I really kept repeating some old behaviors. I kept repeating old ideas. And so what I want to talk about today is really looking at this idea of trust and how maybe it's not so much as, maybe it's not all it's cracked out to be. Like trust can get us so far, but what do we do to get to that next step, to really start to move things into action? And funny enough, I didn't even know this when I picked this topic, but the power of the month is faith. And so we're going to talk about faith. Today, we're talking about my favorite topic, which is me. But next week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about faith and less of my experience, but more of what the basic Unity principles have to offer, and also talking about what we can do as children of God to start to light up that light, even in the midst of the battle of staying small or trying to move past trust into action. So the way it works for me is I want to give a couple ideas on what I use to get outside of myself. One is I have to just wake up to what's blocking me. Like I have to spend time consciously looking inside to determine what it is that's blocking me. This isn't just I want ice cream and I'm going to eat ice cream. It's looking at this example of wanting to have ice cream to really say, okay, I want ice cream. What is it in me that feels that I'm lacking something? Where is the lack in me? If I don't spend time looking at what's blocking me from having a new experience, I'm going to deny myself that new experience. The other way that when I start to learn about what's blocking me from that new experience, I have to jump into prayer, all right? And so with that said, I'm going to jump into prayer right now. This isn't the meditation, but I'm going to jump into a prayer right now. I know this is unconventional. And so in this moment, we just open our hearts. We open our mind's eye to the prospect of a new experience. We know that as God's children, we are given all of the divine wisdom to live in divine order, perfectly healthy, healed and whole, right now in this moment and in every moment. thank you. And so what I do in those moments where I'm struggling to feel whole is I say a prayer. I ask for any blocks that are keeping me small to be removed, conscious and unconscious. Sometimes I don't even know the ways that I'm standing in my own way. And sometimes it takes a horseback riding accident, or it takes a weight gain for me to start looking at what I'm doing and how it's not working. I think that I can get in this space of working a spiritual life, and I keep growing and I keep growing and I keep getting these results, and all of a sudden I become a spiritual ego. Like somewhere in the midst of all of that, I look at the success that this person is experiencing, and I take the reins back. It happens so subtly. It happens so quickly. And then I fall asleep. And I'm walking through life thinking that I'm doing the right things. I'm saying the right meditations. I'm showing up to the right events. I'm pleasing the right people. And in that experience, I feel like it's enough. I think that it's enough, but I don't feel like it's enough. Excuse me. And when I have that feeling is the barometer for where I am in my relationship with the Christ self. When I look at my feelings and I feel out of touch, out of integrity, out of my own skin sometimes, it is really my opportunity to acknowledge that in this moment, I can't trust myself. I have to trust something bigger than me. So not only do I pray for this stuff to be removed, but I take this prayer to another level, and I take this prayer and I ask to be outgodded by God. That I make this invitation to Holy Spirit to become active in my life. I make an invitation for the work and the example of Christ to become active in my thoughts, words, and deeds. And so what that looks like in big academic terms is that I just stop thinking I know everything. Like, just stop thinking I know everything. And when I am able to stop thinking that I know everything, for just a brief moment, I can step outside of myself. What do I do to step outside of myself? I talk to other people, all right? Nobody likes to get nitty and gritty with people, but my spiritual work has to be granular. Like, I can get academic and I can talk about stuff that I read in books. I brought 3 books with me today because I wanted to come off as being well prepared and know what I'm doing, but the facts are, I had about 75 different ideas on what I wanted to talk about, and I didn't know what I wanted to talk about up here, other than I needed to cover trust, and I needed to cover try, and I know faith is the power of the month. And I told you I was coming here for confession, right? So the good news is that we are always outgodded by God, always, every time, and God's never offended by the invitation. I even you have got to show me something here. You have got to give me some words in this moment. You have got to give me some activities to do today, because I don't know what I'm going to do. I have created a habit of driving to work in such a way that I stop at the gas station, pick up food that I don't need, drive to work, eat food that I don't need to eat, then I eat lunch, then I eat post-lunch, then I eat dinner after work, and I'm building these habits. So I'm thinking to myself, give me something to do to change that habit. I meet with people. I find something to keep active. I change just that little routine in such a way that gives me an opportunity to show up for someone else. Not only am I stopping that routine, but I'm getting outside of myself to be available for someone else. So I talk about it with other people. No one likes to admit the stuff that's going on with themselves, but the facts is that I can't be held accountable to myself when I'm in this space. When I'm in the dark night of the soul, I'm just like lost. I don't know how to get out of my rut. And so I have to talk about it. I have to share it. And Mary and I, We co-founded Living Prayer Ministries, and the basis of this whole ministry is that it is through relationship that we heal our minds. That if no one else in this world, we have a place where we can share our private thoughts. If nowhere else. I have a couple other avenues personally, but for us, in our home, we have two rules. One is no private thoughts, and then the other one is no people pleasing, which goes over really well sometimes. So the idea is that we have a radical way of living in our house, which is not always pleasant. It's not always comfortable, but at the foundation of it all is trust. At the foundation of it all is faith that we can move through this experience focusing on forgiveness rather than holding each other in this small space. And so our discussions, I was just talking about this, we do a podcast on Saturdays, and I was just talking about this yesterday. One of the unique parts of our relationship that I never would have expected is that we don't really argue. We do have disagreements, and we do have difference of opinions, and we do get emotional and passionate about those differences sometimes. But here's what we do, is we talk to Holy Spirit in the presence of one another. So we're not arguing at or with one another. We're sharing our frustration, our challenge with Holy Spirit, making an invitation for the activity of Spirit in our relationship to be our first and foremost. So what that does is that gives the person, the individual that has the grievance, because it's really not up to me to fix Mary, as much as I'd like to think that sometimes. And it certainly isn't up to Mary to fix me, although I would love that if she would. The facts is that it's up to us to awaken our own spirituality in the moment, to move past our own limitations, our own small self. And one of the most practical ways that we do that is sharing our challenges to Holy Spirit in the presence of one another. And so we get to hear innocently, to the best of our ability, innocently, what the impact of our behavior is on the other person and how they feel in response to that behavior. It's not a pointing the finger, but rather an offering up together. And so when she's sharing some things like, I'm not good about doing the dishes, I'm really horrible about bringing the trash cans back up from taking out the trash. I always think that I'm just done with that when I take them out. And she gets really upset about that, and rightfully so, because it's a partnership. That being said, it's not her yelling at me, it's her expressing her frustration, and I'm able to hear and realize what is mine to do. So when we get to this space of trust, we have an opportunity to move that trust into action. And that's where faith comes in. Because the trust is the foundation here. We start to recognize, okay, I was able to have success doing it this way for a while, but I know that it's no longer working. I know that when I'm eating secretly, I know that when I'm eating more than my portion, when I'm overeating, I know that when I think that I've got the right ideas and the best ideas and I'm not really paying attention to other people, I've got some opportunity to wake up, all right? It's really not rocket science, but I'll sit there and I'll fight, hand, tooth, and nail to hold on to my ideas. So this next week, we're going to talk about how perhaps trust is brought about by desperation and inspiration, but faith is brought about through perspiration. And so in this week, I just invite you to take time throughout your week. Use this, if any of this made sense, use some of this to look back on, how do I pray for a removal of the things that are keeping me stuck? What's keeping me caught in a loop? What's keeping me caught staying small? And journal it, write it down, spend some time with it. Don't just think about it, because thinking usually is part of my problem. I have to write it down, I have to look at it, And if that's not enough, then share it with somebody. Talk to a trusted person. If we can't trust ourselves, talk to someone we can trust. Invite that conversation. Be bold. There's a book that I read. It says the spiritual life is not a theory, right? And in Unity, we say that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are called to live a spiritual life. We are called to activate that spirit within us that is always wanting to shine. And so when we just think that we're going through our day, caught up in our outcomes, caught up in our relationships, caught up in the things that are external to us, we forget that heaven is nearer than our hands and feet. Heaven is nearer than the fat on my body. That we have an opportunity to grow externally through our internal work. And so not only do we ask for what's stopping us from making our next evolution or involution, we ask God to out-God us. We ask God to show up in ways that we can't even expect. Christ showed up as an example for us. He showed up as the answer to questions that we didn't even know we had. And so when we look to Christ, we can start to see that as his brothers, as children of God, we are equally anointed. How often do we remember that? How often do we remember that? I spent all of last year not remembering that. And so today, I just invite you to challenge yourself to walk out of Unity Center of Cedar Rapids today with a focus on how do I show up trusting a higher power? How do I show up trusting God? How do I show up trusting the example of Christ that's offered freely to us? What's stopping me from doing it? And am I willing to be outguided by God and have something show up and spark that trust, whether it be desperation or inspiration? We'll take that into meditation. Just invite you to get comfortable in your chairs. Let your feet rest comfortably on the ground, knowing that we are anchored by Mother Earth. Becoming conscious of the posture of the body, extending the spine, letting the ribs move up and not push into any organs so that your lungs can fill fully, move freely, perhaps tilting the crown of your head towards the sky, tucking in your chin, extending and elongating the neck and the spine, creating that clear conduit of connection from Father Sky to Mother Earth. Noticing the posture of the body, becoming present to this now moment, giving ourselves permission to connect. Moving deeply within, we embrace this now moment, this divine appointment, to set aside everything that we think we know. We set an intention to be open and willing to receive an example of trust from Holy Spirit, from life source, from the Christ within. We ask that Holy Spirit wipe the slates of our hearts and minds clean today, that a new story might be written on them, that if there's any area of feeling stuck, that if there's any area of feeling challenged or lost, we avail ourselves readily for a new experience, that we be shown exactly what is ours to do. And so we ask to be divorced from selfish or dishonest motives, separated from self-pity, and we ask Spirit to be active in our eyes, that we look for miracles happening around us all the time, that we look for opportunities to be of service, that we can be an extension of a loving God and be of service to those around us. We invite God into our ears that we listen for the one voice that gives us gentle guidance, that tells us we are forgiven, that reminds us we are wholly lovable and wholly loving. We awaken the Christ in our mouths so that we speak a message of patience, kindness, tolerance, and love. And we assert that the intention of these bodies is to serve as communication devices extending a message of love, that every handshake we extend, every embrace we share is a message of compassion and acceptance for our brothers and sisters, all equal children of God, that we walk with purpose in alignment with divine will, that in the midst of any challenge, we know that God is grateful to hear from us, even more so in the dark moments than in the thrill of those easy times. And so we use this time to anchor this intention in our hearts and in our minds right here and right now. Knowing that we are the Christ. And so it is.